Good morning and welcome to today's NENS webinar, which is entitled Client Case Study, IT Strategic Planning for Business Success. My name is Ted Hulsey and I'm your host for today's event. First, let's go through a few housekeeping items. All participants are in listen-only mode. Today's session will be recorded and circulated to all registrants. Thank you for joining in for the live session. Your questions are strongly encouraged throughout the presentation. I'll be monitoring the Q&A log in real time. We'll be sure to ask our speakers your questions as we go along. Please make sure to use the Q&A tool and use the chat function for comments only. We're also sending you a 1-minute survey at the conclusion of the event. We look forward to your input and feedback on the conversation. Let me introduce our speakers. Michael Kirkalakis is a principal at New England Network Solutions. He has been an IT professional for over 20 years. As an engineer, Michael focused on enterprise networking and security. And today, he spends much of his time guiding businesses on IT strategy and security. Michael, welcome.
Thanks, Ted.
And Kathleen Mokel is our special guest. Kathleen is operations manager at Triplet Therapeutics, a company pioneering treatments for repeat expansion disorders. Kathleen looks after all organizational aspects of the company's HR, as well as its facilities and operations, including information technology and services. In a fast-paced and high-growth life sciences business, Kathleen ensures smooth operations and world-class IT through her partnership with the team at NENS. Now, let me turn things over to Michael to review the agenda and get us into the conversation.
Excellent. Thanks, Ted. Hi, everybody. So today, let's talk about what's on deck. So there's a few things that are going to happen. One, we already completed the introductions. But I want to answer a couple questions for people today as we go through this interview style podcast webinar that we're having today. First thing is, how do you know if you have the right IT partner? We're going to talk to Kathleen Mokel today, and she's going to talk about what she went through and some what the decision-making criteria was for having that right type of partner. What makes a great partnership and why is it important? A lot of people like to hire IT partners, but a lot of them don't realize that it takes two to really make it really work really well. We're going to talk at great length about that today. What are the benefits to planning and budgeting? What does the planning process look like? What roles and actions are critical in the planning process? And then at the end, I'm going to show you some of the tools that we have available that aid in our planning process with our clients. So that is the end of the slideshow. Now we're going to get into hanging out with Kathleen and get a chance to do a fireside chat. So Kathleen, welcome. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you doing this for us today. Kathleen, give us a little bit of background on yourself, please.
Sure. So I'm Kathleen Mokel. I'm operations manager at Triplet Therapeutics. We are an early stage biotech company based in Cambridge, Mass. And I've been working in the biotech operations area since about 2016. Before then, I was at a venture capital firm for 20 years, and all of our investments during that time period were focused in the biotech and life science area. And at Triplet, I wear a lot of different hats. I have a lot of different responsibilities. So it requires me to rely on experts to kind of relieve some of that burden and ensure that we're being guided properly. So as part of my role, I oversee IT, but I am not an IT trained professional. So for me, it's really crucial that I partner with the right firm that I trust to kind of guide me through the growth process and ensure that we're stage appropriate and protected at each phase. So NENS has been awesome. I hired them as my IT consultant at my past 3 companies. So after my experience at the first company, it was a no-brainer who I wanted to use going forward at each of the subsequent ones.
Awesome, thank you. So as we saw in the agenda, I'd really like to understand what made you choose NENS to begin with. So this is all part of how you're selecting the right IT partner. Was it, because we dressed well? Was it because you had a criteria of what you were looking for? Just give me a little insight into your process.
Yeah, so we hired you first, I think, in mid-2017, but I've had experience with other IT vendors as well. We compared, for this process, we compared several different firms that were appropriate for our stage, and then we eventually narrowed it down to 3. And just so I can say, it's really important to know first what both you and your company are looking for in an IT vendor. So at that time, we were looking for a group that was really focused on customer service, both response time and professionalism that had been an issue before. We wanted someone with a forward-thinking vision, great at communication, knew about not only IT, but also business stages and processes. And we also wanted a group that could grow or adapt as we changed. And on all of those, in all of those categories, NENS was by far the highest ranking group.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've talked to many clients that we have today, and when a lot of many times we'll come in because they're having a bad experience with an IT service firm. And one of the things I talk to them about when we first sit down is, okay, well, what was your decision-making criteria? What makes a great partner? And they said, well, I don't know, right? And it's so important for the business to really understand, write down, and in order of priority, what they're looking for out of an IT partner. If they're having a hard time understanding that, then as they're interviewing different IT partners, maybe they can ask them some questions to figure that stuff out. But it really is critical for any company looking for an IT partner to have that criteria. So into the next part is, what makes a great partnership, right? So is it us just knowing everything and telling you what to do? Is it, us sitting back and waiting for you to tell us what to do? Just let's talk about, what makes a great partnership work.
Yeah. So it really starts with trust, right? I need to be able to trust you and that you're giving us the right information based on your expertise, and that you need to be able to trust me that I'm giving you the appropriate and proper information so you can make those decisions. So knowing, first of all, that you have a very high level of expertise, service, and responsiveness, it makes it a lot easier. For you, you need to understand that you can trust me to communicate properly with you, to tell you about our business activities. All of those will impact IT. And then any daily IT related issues or concerns or activities, I need to be able to communicate those to you as well. So ideally, the best partnerships are those where there's never really that push-pull. Instead, it's more of a, we're in this together kind of attitude.
Right.
What I love about your group is that we really work in a concerted effort to get our IT needs met, for sure.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, and I mentioned it earlier, it's so critical that there is that trust and that there's that back and forth working relationship. We're not mind readers as IT people, all right? You need to tell us what's happening in your business. We need to be asking questions, of course, but you need to be telling us what's happening in your business so that we know what the priorities are, what are the goals, because we can't be a good, valuable partner. We can't add value to your business unless we know what's happening in your organization. And we're going to talk a lot more about what that process looks like and how we get there. But I do want to kind of switch focus over to Triplet. I know we'd worked together at other companies, but this one was a little bit special because I remember sitting down with you and Ness, and we were in the incubator space, and we were talking about, hey, I have this idea, we're launching this organization. There's only 2 employees today, and I was sitting with them in the room. But it was such an amazing, entrepreneurial conversation around, this is where Ness was, this is what he's learned, this is what he's hoping to get out of this organization. So I love having those conversations. I've been doing this for 20 years, and when I think back over the 20 years, those are the type of conversations that make me love this job. I think that stick in my head about sitting down, very early stage, planning, and I just want to be a small part of that success, right? I want to be there. I want to understand your goals. At the end of the day, we're there so that you can run your operation. I just want to add value. But what I really want to hear from you is just let's talk about that early stage, about how those foundational level discussions helped, impacted, not even helped, but impacted, what the next level of planning was and how and where Triplet is today.
Yeah, that meeting was a lot of fun. I remember that quite well, like it was yesterday. So just to back up, so Triplet was a brand new startup. I was employee number 1. When I got there, we had nothing in place, no computers, no other employees. We didn't even have a company name. So obviously my first call was to NENS, right? We had really nothing. Now our CEO had led a lot of startups before, so he knew the IT lingo. He knew what he wanted to see from sort of a broad perspective. But he was also really good about letting NENS and me kind of work out some of the details and how to conduct that implementation in such a way that we could easily scale it up. So When we sat down in that meeting, we talked about all kinds of things that we were then able to sort of implement along the way. And the ramp up has been really fast and furious in this company. So our CEO is really proactive, fast moving, and we were really expected to get off the ground and running very quickly. We're 2 years old now. We have 37 employees, and we've executed on a ton of different projects. The most recent major one was we were living in several different locations for short-term periods, and so NENS sort of had to follow us around and adjust as we went from one place to another. But we,
I just want to interrupt you quickly because that was actually really funny, right? It was, Kathleen, what building am I meeting you in today? Right?
Right, exactly,
It was
exactly.
like, okay, wait, where are you? Right? I mean, luckily they weren't that far apart, but that was always like fun. Okay, where are we today?
Right, we had labs in one place, we were living in another, and we were really lucky to find a 10,000 square foot facility that we built out and put us all in one place. We moved in January 2020. Of course, we weren't there very long before COVID hit. We will get to that later, I'm sure. But NENS played a critical role in that entire process. So they were involved in all of the planning, the construction meetings, the fiber connectivity, adding in a few other features. They were part of that along the way. So yeah, I think what I learned through that is that regular and increased communication was really key to that process, especially because, like you said, we were in a lot of different places doing a number of different things.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm not an IT professional, so I really need to be able to stay close to my IT partner. I need to be able to trust you because I'm going to be held responsible for that on the back end. And you are really crucial for the strategic part of our growth. And so, I know I'm a little needy. I hope it's in a little bit of a constructive way. But, I use you at NENS very often. So, you know what that looks like. But I reach out to my account manager all the time. It's a very cooperative kind of thing. We have weekly calls and regular emails. We discuss all the projects. And my account manager really then relays all of that information to your team. So it's great for sort of a one-stop shop. And I can even review outstanding help desk tickets that way, which is helpful to my team too. So I can, kind of move forward with that. So, I think that regular communication with everybody is just so important. I have that with the account manager, with you, with field engineers, sort of everybody, the IT manager. So yeah, that I would highly recommend that everyone put those kinds of things in place for sure. It helps tremendously.
Yeah, like we said, there was no company name when we first met. You were the employee number one, in less than two, and actually the funny part was, I think we'll be about 10, 12 people in a year or so. Right? And then I talked to Kathy and it's like, well, we might have a little bit more trying to do 37 not in a short time.
Right.
Talked about all the people involved in it, and it absolutely takes a village, right? But you went from no name to 37 people, a pretty mature life sciences operation. Yeah, so it's we definitely moved pretty quickly. What I want to talk about though is that getting from not having a name and employee number one to 37 employees, there was a lot of stuff that you guys had to do as a business. And back to those conversations that we had early on about the planning, right? The strategy, the budgeting, right? Putting standards in place. So I'd really like us to just chat a little bit about, by doing that upfront work, right? Which wasn't, it wasn't a ton, but it's not like, it's a little conversation. How did that enable you guys to continue to scale and grow without it impacting operations? What were the things that we put in place? I know, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as part of that meeting and that whole onboarding process for NENS, we really wanted to review all the choices that were available to us for laptops, document storage, and that kind of thing. So we worked very closely with you to choose the PCs, the monitors up front. So when we scaled, all I needed to do was say, yeah, we have 3 people starting. I need 3 packages. And, they all, it was all just sort of done on the back end. And then any models
just arrived on your doorstep.
Exactly. And then any model changes that came through, because computers do change over time, that was communicated to us. We made those adjustments, but we really had some hardware and software standards, and some were based on the role. So there were a couple of employees who needed sort of a more robust system based on what they were doing.
Right.
So we kind of needed to sort of put those parameters in place to kind of, but it really made everything scale nicely. And then, in terms of our data, we knew we needed to be primarily cloud-based. I mentioned we were working out of several locations that were not our own, so we couldn't actually gain access to the IT closets there. So we did a lot of cloud-based options, such as Office 365 and Box.com, AWS and Azure AD. And then everything we put in place was then built to scale. So they were very conscious decisions that allowed us to ramp up quickly and then make adjustments constantly without negatively impacting operations at all. Like, we really moved quite fast, right?
Right. I mean, that was awesome, right? Because, well, we're going to talk about some IT policy stuff as well in a minute, but, we talked a lot about the disaster recovery plan, business continuity, having that cloud first approach. And really, when we sat down and did that, they all kind of melded together, right? It's like, well, the DR strategy is much, much easier when you're not reliant on like a physical space and infrastructure, right? But just as you said, I mean, it makes it so much easier for us as your IT partner to understand who are the different people in the organization, not really who are the different people, but what are the roles, what is the standard set of applications, printers that they need, tools to do their job. And so when you say, hey, I have X person starting with X name, we know, okay, well, email address, what groups to add them to, what they get access to, what type of equipment that they need. And it's just roles, right? There's no, well, let me go see what's available. What kind of computer do you want today? How big is the monitor, right? Like, all that stuff just goes away, right? And when you think about, and not everybody grows at your pace, but even for people that grow at a smaller pace, like, you don't want to have that conversation every single time with us, right? It's like, well, don't you remember the last thing that I ordered? And, can you just make it match, right? So that whole part, if we do that type of planning and have those buckets set up, like, it again makes this thing so much easier. Right. But go ahead. I know I cut you off. I know we were about to talk about some.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and the decisions that we made that day really allowed us to move forward. The good thing is you and your team had been through this before, so you knew about the technology, you knew the space, you knew what to think of before we even got there. So that really helped out a lot. And then you touched on IT policies as well. I think that's also really important to put in place up front, is just making sure that you're all aligned on that front. And NENS has a really great model of robust templated IT policies that they've created. So really all we needed to do was fill out a very long questionnaire, but the answers to that flowed directly into each of these policies. So then you can review them in small batches and make modifications and tailor them to your needs. And, we were able to put in some basic policies, and then we could work to expand those as we scaled up. But they offered guidelines not only for the triplet administration and the employees, but also for NENS to understand what our policy expectations were. I think that helped out a lot too.
Yeah. The great thing about starting with policies and all, and you can get lost in them, right? So I know we talked about, for your organization, stage appropriate. For other people that aren't in the life sciences space, it's like, well, what's important to us at this current point in time, and where do we want to focus? Those policies force us to ask questions around, well, what do we need for data retention? What does our backup need to look like? What's our DR plan? If we do have a security breach, right, and we need an incident response policy, what does that look like? So it forces us to work together to say, okay, well, what are these things that we want to put in place? Educate and communicate the entire organization with the people that absolutely need to know about those things. But again, they're really great planning tools, right, to help identify what are the critical things in our organization.
Absolutely, yeah. And right alongside that really is the strategy right. And the approach right. For security. Ultra important for us, probably one of the most important things. And we needed to make some choices off the bat that kind of scaled as we grew, and just understanding that we took security very seriously. So, it started out pretty basic, and then as we grew in size, it took on a greater importance. And so we were able to add additional items such as, know before, we're in the process of doing Okta, that kind of thing. So just knowing early on that that's where we were going to go really helped a lot. Yeah, and then just, you did a lot of research on your end to kind of make sure that things were in place, and help us develop a plan for that as well. We had a lot of lab equipment that needed to be backed up and saved, and you really helped us think through that. So you knew what our problem was. We worked with your team and our lab users to come up with a really good solution. It was very much a team-oriented approach on that. Our whole team, not just me. And that when we moved into our new space, we were just kind of ready to go. So that moved us away from the encrypted flash drives when we were not in our space to something that was really, easy to access. Yeah. So really that good planning makes IT really an enabler of success rather than a hurdle, right?
Yeah. Some of the things you just mentioned, and I hope I touched on each one that was running through my mind as you were talking. One thing that brings me back to like the Red IT partner. The Red IT partner isn't just like an IT nerd, right? It's not just a partner that like can fix computers and do stuff. As you mentioned, having expertise in what you do, like being somewhat vertically focused and understanding what the needs of your organization at different stages are is critical, right? Because we're not as valuable to you if we don't understand, okay, when you get here, you really need X, and when you get here, you need Y, right? So when we talk about, the right type of partner, I just feel like there's and a lot of people overlook this, but there's just so much additional value if somebody understands you, and your business. And then you had talked a little bit about the security. Yeah, security is critical, right? And planning for security, is paramount, right? So yes, we can say, oh, you need a little bit of this, a little bit of that, right? But unless we, again, back to understanding you as an organization and understanding what's important and where the risks are, like we need to protect you against those things. And so we need to come up with a strong plan. And you had mentioned growth, which is a great segue into the next part, because although we had plans, although we did, all this budgeting and planning early on, I talked about how you're only supposed to be 12 people in a year. So
Right.
as they say, the best laid plans, right? They're going to change. And I remember as the organization grew, there was new senior leadership that was brought on board. Although you're primarily responsible for IT, there were senior leadership in the exec team that questioned the IT strategy, right? And rightfully so, right? They're coming in, they're like, hey, we're on the stage of growth where we're looking to get from here to here. Are we doing things the right way? And of course, I'm always up for a good challenge, but like we should talk about how, hey, the phone call I got, hey, Mike, I need you to come in and talk to a couple people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, well, not everybody has this experience with a group like NENS. So we had members of our senior leadership team that were really skeptical of IT vendors in general.
That's a nice way.
Their experience with them was generally negative. Like we tell them what to do and they do it. So it's more of a responsive, not proactive kind of approach. And I wasn't used to that with you. So I had to kind of get their buy-in and give them the visibility to you so they understood and could trust you the way I trust you. They had some questions about the goals and the strategy, making sure that we were in the right place. They were very focused on, are we stage appropriate? Are we doing the right things? And they had been in biotech before, so they knew, what to expect from different companies. So, but I knew that NENS was different than other groups. So I invited the entire NENS team to come in. So Michael, IT manager, our account manager, all came in. We sat down with the senior leadership team for a 2-hour meeting and reviewed your capabilities, your approaches to budgeting, security, etc. Just making sure that you understood our business goals and timing too. And at the end of the meeting, it was really interesting because the one senior leadership team member who was the most skeptical sent me an email and all it said was, I was very impressed. That was it. And so I think the important thing here, and this is for you, but also for anybody working with an IT vendor, what's good is that you guys knew, you had the IT knowledge base, but you were also really thoughtful in your planning and your processing. And these are things that he commented on. You were familiar and experienced with the biotech sector and the latest and greatest technology, but you also were able to speak about budgets and the financial lingo and the stages of a company. And I think that really went a long way because they understood that you were not just an IT vendor, right? So you had more in your cart. Yeah.
Right.
to offer.
I mean, I have no plans on changing a job ever, but who knows? But I'm gonna take that quote and put it somewhere on my resume at some point down the line if I ever need to. So you're right. So we had that meeting and it was great. And like I said, I'm always up for a good challenge. But that also highlighted what the next level of planning needed to be, right?
Yep.
So, all the stuff that we'd done before, a lot of it was still strong and still in place, right? Having the different roles and us ordering hardware, getting people set up and, understanding, and, in your world, SOP, standard operating procedures for onboarding of employees, offboarding of employees, like all that stuff, still tried and true will continue on. But now it's okay. Now you're going to the next level. And now there was a question around, all right, well, hey, I need a budget over the next 2 years, right? Like,
Right.
what does that kind of look like? So, I'll let Kathleen comment on this a little bit, and then I'll jump in. But, again, backed up for a great challenge. It was, hey, we have some stuff shaking and happening here. What do you, I need your help in getting this done.
Yeah, so with the budget, we have a seasoned life science executive team on our end, but they had discussed sort of a budget, and I'd worked with them on some of those things outside of NENS, but they wanted sort of to make sure that everything was on the same page. So they requested NENS's help to put together like sort of a 2-year budget that we then used to kind of compare what we had put together and what you had put together in terms of the numbers and that kind of thing. And you had not seen what we had done, but it was kind of a tight turnaround, right? We didn't give you a whole lot of time to do it.
No, you didn't. No, it was very kind of you to give me a couple of days.
You did. I think having the background in place was able to, that helped you a little bit to pull it together quickly. You had that information for us. But you were able to put something together, and not strangely enough, but it was pretty much identical within a tiny margin of error. It was the same number, bottom line. And so I think that was really, a good thing for our CFO to see, to, understand that you were really aligned with what we were doing. And I think that's because of the communication that we had. So
yeah, and that's really, I think the really important part, going back to like the true partnership thing, is that we were involved in the conversations, right? And you are a little bit needy, so we talk a lot, right? So we knew exactly what was happening, and we did have that really great discussion around, well, let's talk through some very critical things that you guys are planning to do. What does the headcount look like as we move forward? Actually, one of the things we're going to show today is I'm going to dig into some of the tools that we use. One of them is a budgeting tool that looks very much like a general ledger pulled out of QuickBooks, but I'll show you some of the ins and the outs. But the great thing about putting that together is it's very dynamic, like based on employee count in any particular month. It's going to show your cost of support, cost of software. If there are projects that are going to happen in a particular quarter, a particular month within the year, we'll put the notes in there. And then what it allows you to do is, one, of course, have a really clear picture of exactly what the budget looks like, but it allows you to pull the levers along the way to say, okay, yes, we are going to do this, or we're going to move this up, or we're going to push this off a little bit. So, but at least we're on the same page and we're working off of that same playbook. So, I'll be honest and tell you, I don't get it that right all the time, but I'm glad I'm glad I got it right this time. So yeah, I'm glad we delivered on expectations. And again, back to the partnership, right? Is that we receive really great information from the group at Triplet, right? So what are the regulations they need to that are being governed by between HIPAA, GDPR, and whatnot. So again, it's just the point of this is it's really important for the client to trust us, pull us into those very high level conversations. If you just kind of leave us out on the periphery, we're not going to add a lot of value, right? I mean, there's just so much more that we can do for you if you let us in. And as I mentioned, I don't get it that right all the time, and there's times I get it even wrong. But that's the part of the partnership is that we sit down, I think one thing, and you correct it, and then we work together to make sure we have a great plan moving forward. So.
Yeah, and there's a level of investment on both sides here too. So this isn't just you push it, you put it all in place and it just happens. Like I have a total of at least an hour's worth of conversations with you and your team, different pieces of your team every week. And so that's time on my side, it's time on your side, but and we've pulled senior leadership into biweekly meetings with you as well. And so I think it's still, even though there's that level of time investment, I think it's really important because then you need to know, that way when it's time to pivot, we understand what's going on from your perspective. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's critical that we're on the same page. And we talked about the time investment, right? The time investment in the front for planning, the time investment that it takes on an ongoing basis. And there's a couple things I'll touch on, but it's really great to plan and not need than need and not plan, right? I put a spin on something that people have heard before, right? And so it's really important that we talk through things and so at least we have a game plan if something like that does arise. A lot of times in planning, we talk, people say, how likely is that to happen, right? How likely is for the building to burn down? I don't know. How likely is it that we're going to have a pandemic at some point in the future, right? It's like, who would think of silly things such as that, right? I mean, who would think, right? So planning those business continuity solutions, how you operate or whatnot. So talk to me a little bit about how all of that planning, now COVID hits, what impact did COVID have to your operation based on the work that, effort that we put in prior to COVID to allow you guys to run?
Yeah, it's really key to have the right things in place, but you also need to understand when it's time to kind of change on a dime, right? So that flexibility key is actually really key as well. So COVID-19 is an example of how the planning aids in the forward movement when these unexpected events take place. Some are expected, some are unexpected. This one is not expected. So luckily our initial choices of being in the cloud, Box.com, Office 365, that helped a lot. When we built out our facility in that process, we had decided to use Zoom rooms, and we had set up our new facility with a lot of that capability. And so we were brand new to Zoom about a month, 2 months before we needed to, all go offline and use Zoom completely, right? So it ended up being a really easy transition for us, so that it felt like we were able to really make forward progress. Like we never really stopped, even during COVID times.
Right.
And then all of the other IT that we had in place allowed us to kind of move seamlessly without any delay, other than just having people physically in the lab, for obvious reasons, right? But even during the downtime of COVID, we put other IT initiatives in place. We said, well, some of our people have less to do right now because they can't get into the lab. Let's do KnowBe4, right? So, and then all of this hit with cybersecurity problems, and so just adding that component when we had a little bit of quiet time was actually really important. So we never really lost. We just filled in the gap there, right? But we also used some of that time to start the budget planning process, which is, another thing. Definitely work on that before last minute. That takes time and you want to be thoughtful about it. So so we were able to kind of move into the COVID situation without dropping a ball at all. I mean, it just, nice and easy.
Of course, if you have to go on site for the labs, that's one thing, right? The labs are a different thing. But as far as all the other parts of the operation, you just sat at a different desk or in your bed or wherever you decided your home office was at the time.
Right.
So all right. Now, a lot of people are gonna ask, what type of effort does it take to stay on top of this stuff? I know we kind of, as we weave through this discussion, we've touched on it a lot, about, you spending an hour a week on it, but let's talk about, how we stay so in sync together, and I'm gonna show you our business review process and the tools that we use along the way. But talk to me about, your investment, how you see us in that process a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, basically it really all comes down to communication, right? That helps with budgeting, the strategy sessions, my meetings with account managers, like it really just makes such a big difference. And I mentioned earlier, we're starting these bi-weekly calls with our CFO, Michael, and then our IT manager at NENS, just to make sure that you're fully aware of what's going on our company side, how that affects the planning, budgeting, timing, that kind of thing. And, you know, I'm not always in the loop on some of those high level company activities either. I'm not on the senior leadership team. So those meetings are actually important to me too, because that gives me visibility to both sides, right? So it's really helpful on that side too. And, you know, I mentioned that all of these meetings require an investment of time and expertise on both sides. But you know, there are a lot of benefits to having these IT partners in the room from the planning perspective, all of them, right? And so you get a lot, you know, much better alignment, ability to stay on top of the technology, keep us safe. And then the fire drill urgency kind of piece, other than COVID, sort of disappears, right? Because, you know, I don't like unnecessary fire drills. I like to kind of have an idea and be prepared so that I can flex and shift accordingly. And you know, I think that fire drills and the urgent actions, you know, going back to fix underlying problems before proceeding, they cost a lot more money in the longer term as well, a lot more time consuming to fix what's wrong, rather than keeping sort of a good health, IT and security health along the way. So just like, you know, you go to the doctor, right? You know, just make sure you have regular IT health screens, right?
Right. You know, the part that I was alluding to earlier, why, you know, it's better to plan and not need than need and not plan is we're going to talk about things that are happening now. You know, now this is IT, it's technology. Of course, sometimes things break and there was no way to tell, right? But when you can tell, when you can say, well, this thing's getting a little long in the tooth, you have this project that you're going to probably need to do, we possibly could push it off. But us having that conversation and saying, okay, well, if this does happen, this is how we'd approach it. Here are some budgetary numbers as to, you know, option A or B as to what we would do, and you start talking about these things so that you know, as you mentioned, if the fire drill does happen, if there is an event where, you know, some system goes down or we need to replace something, we're not making decisions under duress, right? Because that's the worst thing you can do. It's let's just get it up as fast as possible and let's get it back up and running. And let's throw some money at this thing. And you're right. One, there's the opportunity cost from the business, right? The business gets shut down because, or that part of the business gets shut down depending on what's affected. And then you're throwing a bunch of money at it just to get it back up and running, but you still haven't fixed the problem. You've most likely just duct tape and Band-Aids and bubble gum, right, and put it back together. And now we have to talk about, okay, well, what's the longer term solution? So there's just all this effort and time and money and everything else spent on just the, you know, where if we just talked about this stuff and talked about a possible, you know, fix for it or different options for getting it done, I guarantee anybody that's running a business would be much more comfortable with an outcome of having options already discussed prior to like having that fire drill with your hair on fire and just not knowing what to do, right? So that's important as far as how that planning process does go. And then of course business reviews, are they important?
Yes, don't blow them off. Make sure you're fully engaging your team. They're really important. You just want to make sure that everyone is thinking strategically towards the future and, you know, sort of preparing in advance. That's the budgeting, the procurement, the planning, all of that is so important. I guarantee you those meetings will save time, money, and headaches down the road, but you know, they really are important. And I learn a lot from them too. So they're good for me managing the process as well.
Awesome. All right, Chad, I'm gonna need some help here. I wanna show off some of the tools that we have. I just want to make sure I'm sharing my screen appropriately for everybody that's in the webinar.
Okay, I'm standing by. Go ahead and fire up your tool set and we'll give you a thumbs up on. So we're seeing the MyIT Process tool and a budget spreadsheet. So take it away.
Great. So I'll, you know what, let me start off with MyIT Process. So over a number of years, and NENS has been around for a long time, since like 1993. But what we've done is we've put together a ton of just standards, right? What are the things that are just foundational level things that every organization needs to have? And then, you know, what are the questions that we have to ask? And as you can see up here, you know, there's, you know, close to 500 questions in different categories. We talked about infrastructure. There are subcategories within these things like local area infrastructure, local area networks, you know, all these questions that we ask. So there's, as I mentioned, there's about 500 questions, and all of these rank towards a particular standard that that we've put in place. And of course, those standards have evolved over a period of time, right? We're not using the same standards today that we did 20 years ago, of course, right? So we're constantly updating all of these things. You know, what is the right type of operating system? What are the softwares that are supported? You know, what is the proper network infrastructure equipment? What's the right type of security? So we have all of these things in here, and we fill these out for all of our clients. And it's a task that takes probably anywhere from 4 to 8 hours worth of effort when you put all of it together. And I'll quickly want to talk about what that process is. So first, what we do is we have an engineer go through and answer all of these questions. And anywhere where the client isn't meeting the standard, the engineer is going to put notes in this to exactly what they have there, why it's not meeting the standard, pardon me, and then what they feel is the next step to get them to that particular standard. Once the engineer is done with filling out all of these questions, they forward it on to what we call like your technical, your virtual CIO, and they go through and they look at all of the notes of the engineer. And then they mark whether or not that that particular question is aligned, needs additional conversation, and they'll even start talking about, you know, what steps you're going to take to rectify those particular issues. There are, of course, questions in here that are not applicable, right? So even though there's, you know, we have about 500 questions just in this, there are questions that might not be applicable to somebody, and those just get marked as such, and then we move on. But the power in this is being able to look across all of these standards, being able to do a gap analysis, and then distill it down to what are the areas from a nuts and bolts tech standards perspective that we need to focus on. And I'm going to show you a couple of reports, but before I do that, you know, you saw, you know, some of the areas that are here around firewall, network cabling, you know, security, you know, server infrastructure, hardware. So just to get a little, you know, glimpse as to all the areas that we cover. And then, actually, I apologize. And then there are additional standards as well. So we have things around cybersecurity. We have business continuity, GDPR checklists and audits, NIST controls 853 as well as 800-171, and 171 for anybody that's watching this right now for doing work with Department of Defense, you know, following the DFAR standard. There's a new standard called CMMC. So for those of you that know what that stuff is, you know how critical it's become in the last month or so to make sure that you're meeting that standard. HIPAA assessments and so forth. So there's a lot of tools that we have at our disposal to be able to benchmark our clients and be able to do that gap analysis, so that when we're sitting down and talking to them, it's not a, you know, what I've seen in the past a lot with some of these business reviews and why people sometimes push them off is the conversations aren't engaging, right? It's the IT provider coming and selling crap to you. It's like, hey, buy this new whiz-bang thing today, right? And that's not what we want to do. We want to have a very engaging conversations with our clients. We want to talk to them about where they're not meeting the standard, how it affects the business, and provide them with the information that they need and educate them on where they stand, and allow them to make the decision at the end of the day as to where the investments need to be. I pulled this up. This is a, you know, I use New England Network Solutions as this. I could have maybe marked some stuff, you know, bad or whatnot, but here in the report we can easily filter out, you know, things that are all in green, which are aligned, marginal, other things in yellow, and then we also have some things that would be marked as vulnerable. So if I'm in here, we can take a look at, you know, all the different questions that were asked, and then if we have any business analysis in here. But really what I'm going to do is I'm going to rebuild this report, and I'm just going to look at, you know, things that I had marked as vulnerable, right? So, you know, as we go down, it's just going to talk about, you know, here are all the different categories, how many questions we asked, what state that they're in. And then when I get down to the nuts and bolts, you know, here's the question, here's the technical analysis, you know, and then what are the next steps that we need to have to take place. So those are, you know, a couple things, and there's one other thing that I'm going to pull up for you as it relates to that. And I'm going to pull it back here. And then as we have all those findings, as we're answering those questions and they're not meeting the standard, what we want to do with our clients is build out a game plan. And we start taking all of those findings and we start attaching them to different initiatives. And then we can put like budgetary numbers with them, so that when we sit down with our clients, we're able to compartmentalize what are the issues. Is it related to backup and DR? Is it related to security? Is it related to mobile device management? What are the different things? And then we can sit down and talk through all the items that we want to address. And these things are really, really simple. So if we say, you know what, this really isn't a big deal, these rainy day initiatives, let's move it out to next year in Q3. It's really simple. We can do this on the fly as we're working with our clients to help them better plan and organize the things that need to happen around the business. So super powerful tool, and I'll talk about this at the end of this as well. But where this takes such considerable effort, where it takes a good amount of time, we're going to offer up to 5 people that attended the webinar today for us to go through this with them. And be able to sit down with them and show them exactly where the gaps are in their organization and have a really great deliverable. So there's actionable items that will come out of this exercise for any organization that's interested. I did talk about the budget. I will tell you that we don't do a ton of this level of budgeting with clients. What I showed you before around having the different initiatives and giving you some budgetary numbers around them, that's primarily what we do, but there are clients that require a different level of budgeting, which we're totally comfortable doing. And as I mentioned earlier, this looks like a dump of a general ledger out of QuickBooks, and you can take a look here and you can see costs from NENS, cell phone reimbursement, new employee IT startup costs, if we're spending some time on site doing some block time for clients, training expenses. And of course, there's a couple in here where we have some blanks where we can add some things to it. So we sit there and we look at, for anybody that's in finance, right, chart of accounts, and we try to map all these things as best we can back to your budget. We'll work very closely with your finance team to do it. The thing that is, as I alluded or talked about earlier, is that the great thing about what we built here is that all of this stuff is dynamic. So if I change the employee count here, then it's going to change all of your budgetary numbers as far as applications that SaaS-based applications that you might use where you have to pay the monthly fee for them. Every time there's a delta between employee count here and here, if we go up to the top, you'll see that there are startup costs for that particular employee. And as we talked about with Kathleen, it's all around I put in some averages around the equipment, right? For laptops and so forth. So we build some averages in for those new employee startups. So as we're walking through this together, we can make changes on the fly, and they're relevant, right? They're relevant to what's happening. And also, as we talked about, as things change as we move forward, we could take things like projects that we might have identified, up here. Like we had a new server in SAN as an example. Well, we're expecting that to happen in April, but for some reason it gets pulled in earlier or later. We can just grab the cell and then move it around. Point being is that we can get really, really granular with our clients and help build this whole thing out so they know exactly where things stand. This is not something that we can do for anybody. We have to have really strong working understanding of the organization, as we do with Triplet Kathleen, which we were able to do a similar exercise for them. But the other MyIT Process exercise of doing that gap analysis is something we can do for a few people that joined us for this webinar today. So I'll leave it open. We have about 10 minutes left for Q&A. So Chad, I'll hand it back over to you, and you can tell me if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, so let's go into formal Q&A. So want to continue to invite everybody.
Ted, I messed up. I think I think Kathleen did want to have a couple of closing statements, just to, and then we can click it over to Q&A. I apologize, Kathleen.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, I consider NENS and its staff to be extended employees of my firm in terms of how I engage them. And I really try to bring them in as much as possible in our activities so we're all aligned. I really feel like that's really important. But the bottom line is you have to be able to trust them. And Michael and the team he's put in place is a team that I really trust. And all of these employees reflect the same attention to detail ethics, foresight, knowledge, and professionalism. And it's a journey, so you want to make sure you're going to partner with the right team, and doing so in a really proactive, kind of well-planned, deliberate, and cooperative way. That'll just ensure smoother sailing with less cost and fewer surprises along the way. He might be embarrassed by this, but I did want to tell a quick story about NENS that was never advertised, but I stumbled upon it. I hope you won't be embarrassed, Michael, but Michael and I have talked a lot about baseball. We have kids who do baseball. And so I went to one of my son's baseball games in the Lowell Spinners Stadium in Massachusetts. And I looked across the field and I saw a NENS sponsorship banner. Now, we've talked a lot, but I had never heard you say that you had sponsored the baseball team there. And, so I had no idea that they had made that sponsorship. So I took a picture and I sent him the photo from the field, and then I followed up with him later. And I learned that not only does he sponsor groups that are important to him, like this baseball group, but he also works really closely with a Boys and Girls Club in the city that they are based in Lowell, Mass, helping to feed kids and families over the summer. And I had never, I've known them for a long time, never knew that they did all of this too. It's not something that they talk a lot about, but for me, it's a sign of overall thoughtfulness about everything, sort of integration into the community, how they can be of help to more than just clients. They're never in your face about these partnerships, but I figured it out and found out and asked the questions. I was not surprised at all that they were doing this, but it really made me love this organization even more. It's a really symbolic of the NENS culture that every employee is genuinely kind, nice, service-oriented, communicative, helpful, and very skilled, and they care about so much more than just IT. And they really are a partner to me in my firm. So, whatever you decide to use, whoever you use as your IT vendor, I really think like bringing them in as sort of members of your team really makes such a better relationship across the board.
Thank you. I think you might find this hard to believe. I don't do well with public praise, so I'm going to totally deflect this right now. The team we have here does such a great job. I mean, right around Thanksgiving, we're doing meals for people in the city. Toy drives around Christmas time. Jacket drives and so forth. It's just, we feel it's just so important for our values and our culture. And although I think it's important, the thing that's more important than that is that the people that are here live it, right? I mean, and even do it, better than me, right? So back to deflecting the public praise. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And yeah, a lot of these things are important to us, especially during COVID, right now. Feeding some of the inner city kids was really important. But thank you very much for saying that. Yeah. All right, Chad. I'm sorry. I'll give it back to you. I messed up the order.
So that's great. So let's jump into a couple questions. So I think one theme that jumped out is kind of like evolution of needs. So I kind of have a two-parter here. First, like, what is the best business review cadence so that you are able to adapt to change? And I'd like to hear a little bit more about the evolving security needs of Triplet. You guys mentioned that you guys have gone to various levels over the years, and if you could provide a little background on that, that'd be great.
I'll answer the cadence one, and I'll leave Kathleen to answer the security one. So the cadence is really based on how fast you're moving and how many projects you have as an organization, right? So if things are pretty status quo, us getting together twice a year is totally fine, right? Like you don't have a lot of projects going on. If you're fast-growing organization, if anybody's ever read any of the Vern Harnish stuff, he talks about if you're growing, 30, 40, 50%, then we really should be meeting on a monthly basis, right? And doing a real strategy to figure out how fast things are moving, because at that rate of growth, things pivot really quickly, and we need to get involved and make quick, fast-moving changes. So it really is, there is no one size fits all. It's custom tailored to each individual organization, and we just make sure as we communicate. Like there are some very structured communications around the business reviews, but as Kathleen mentioned, we're talking to our clients all the time, and our account managers are really good at saying, hey, it seems like there's a lot going on. Maybe we need to add another business review here if we're not as in tune to what their growth rate is, or or, but if we're going through this review process and we're doing that MyIT process, then we know all the projects that should be happening. So we'll be able to adjust our cadence based on, what's happening in what quarter, making sure we're planning, we have a lot of time in advance of that to plan properly.
Yeah, and sort of to back up on what you said there, Michael. So also for us, as we're, we could have a really high growth phase within a short period of time, and then it gets a little less afterwards. So sometimes the meetings happen more frequently when we have a lot of things going on, and then they can back off. And even the managed care service plans that we've been doing, we've gone back and forth on different levels of plans depending on, what our stage is. So the flexibility for that is also, I think, really key, just being able to kind of weave in and out depending on where you are. And same with security. Like, I think for us, security has just been building and building, right? So it started off, you just want to protect, we didn't even have a whole lot of data to protect at that point, right? Now we do. Like, we have lab equipment generating all kinds of data. So we have to make sure that all of our systems are backed up multiple times. So even though we're in the cloud, NENS has really helped us put together very robust backup systems so we can always get at our data and we won't lose that. And then, just making sure that with some of the groups that we're looking at, we need to make sure that we're following different regulations that are out there without, saying too much, different compliance things that we need to put in place. And that is sort of even above the level of security. It's really knowing that the group that you partner with understands that from the industry perspective, and then can follow along with that with you, right? So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Michael, but.
We talked, and we touched upon earlier, right? It's about, for your organization, it's called stage appropriate. For other organizations, it's, what's right for them at that point in time. With NENS, there's a particular standard, we have a 10 minimum security standards for every client that we want them to uphold, right? 5 of them every client gets with just being a part of NENS, which has to do with email security, antivirus, firewalls, next gen solutions. But some of the other ones that we're really pushing clients to opt in for is know before, right? And we mentioned know before. Know before is security awareness training, right? Your employees are your weakest link is the thing you're going to hear, and that's because they tend to, be really, they're really busy. They get an email, they accidentally click on this thing, right? We need to be able to make sure employees understand, like, don't click on the link unless you know it, right? So it's just going through and training them on what are the traps of security. So that's what the know before is. We have clients, subscribe to that. Other things that is mandated now as well, but there's multiple ways to do it, is multi-factor authentication. And multi-factor authentication is where you require more than one form of authentication, right? So it's not just a password; it's a password and maybe a text message with like a digits in a string, or there's an app on your phone that allows you to get access to it. If you have online banking, at least you should, if you have online banking, have used multi-factor authentication before. And you need to do that across the spectrum, right? For everything that you have, business critical applications such as, email or like a Salesforce.com or whatever it might be, anything that has data that would be dangerous if somebody else got their hands on. Like, you need to make sure that stuff's protected. So, again, based on what industry you're in, what you need to safeguard, we'll put a customized plan in place and help you identify what the biggest risks are and give you a path to get to strong security. The point is, you want the best security posture that you can get, but also be reasonable about it, right? You can't spend $1 million on security, right? There's a diminishing point of return at some point. You just have to figure out what the risks that you're willing to live with.
Okay, well, fantastic. I think we're just about out of time. We started on time. Let's end on time. Michael, why don't you wrap us up with a call to action and any final thoughts for our audience today?
You got it. All right, so let me pull this up. And let's flip this. Okay, so here, whoops. All right, so here, you can email me directly, michaelk@nens.com. You can call us. You can request risk assessment or the budgeting tool not the budgeting tool, but the MyIT Process tool by emailing sales@nens.com. So anybody that has a question about today's webinar, or anybody that would like to request us go through that MyIT process, then I suggest you give me a call, send me an email, or send an email to sales@nens.com, and we can engage with you. So that's the call to action. I really appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you for joining us, and I can't thank Kathleen enough for taking an hour plus out of her day today to join us and be part of this panel. I enjoyed it very, very much, but thank you so much, Kathleen.
Happy to have done it. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks Kathleen, thanks Michael. This was another NENS webinar, and thank you to everyone for tuning in today. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks.